Hi, you guys. It is Wednesday again, um, and we're together. Awesome. We've been doing this for a while, and I know I say it every time. You guys are great. You're just wonderful. I've been sharing this on Instagram as well, and it is getting lots of views. So um, put out a watch party, share it. Let's see who all is sitting at home out of the rain tonight. Yeah, let's make it a party. We've got a good story tonight. I have not read it. Uh, you guys know if you suggest something, I'll do it cold, and we'll see where it goes. I am not sure. I'm assuming this was probably originally written in Spanish, um, but there again, I don't know. It was suggested by Cheryl McBride, who has been with us from day one. She and her husband both watch, which is awesome. I love you guys. I miss you. Um, do it hot. It is hot. It is hot, but we are in the back. We've got the back door open and kind of shut off. So as the wind comes through, it should make it kind of nice in here. But that is why we are not outside, because I was afraid all you guys would hear are the 40-mile-an-hour winds. So we're not going to do that. Instead, we'll just sit back here. You guys can see kind of the whole studio, all of the fun stuff that gets collected. So the story tonight is called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. I've not read it, so there we go. So we will be enjoying this for the first time together, which is awesome and kind of what Wednesdays are about. No, Cheryl, thank you for this story. This was suggested by you, so we'll just hang out. McBride's, how's it going? Going well? I hope so. What's closing date? The 1st? I think is what you said, July 1st. That's awesome. I'm really excited for you guys. I know you are excited about the move too. So, yeah, we'll just get started and we'll see who else joins us. But go ahead, just hit the little share button, start a watch party, and maybe we can get some of those Blackford kids to watch. On the 3rd day of rain, they had killed so many crabs inside the house that Pelayo had to cross his drenched courtyard and throw them into the sea, because the newborn child had a temperature all night, and they thought it was due to the stench. The world had been sad since Tuesday. Sea and sky were a single ash-gray thing, and the sands of the beach, which on March nights glimmered like powdered light, had become a stew of mud and rotten shellfish. The light was so weak at noon that when Pelayo was coming back to the house after throwing away the crabs, it was hard for him to see what it was that was moving and groaning in the rear of the courtyard. He had to go very close to see that it was an old man, a very old man, lying face down in the mud, who, in spite of his tremendous efforts, couldn't get up, impeded by his enormous wings. Frightened by that nightmare, Pelayo ran to get Elisenda, his wife, who was putting compresses on the sick child, and he took her to the rear of the courtyard. They both looked at the fallen body with a mute stupor. He was dressed like a rag picker. There were only a few faded hairs left on his bald skull, and very few teeth in his mouth, and his pitiful condition of a drenched great-grandfather took away any sense of grandeur he might have had. His huge buzzard wings, dirty and half-plucked, were forever entangled in the mud. They looked at him so long and so closely that Pelayo and Elisenda very soon overcame their surprise, and in the end found him familiar. Then they dared speak to him, and he answered in an incomprehensible dialect with a strong sailor's voice. That was how they skipped over the inconvenience of the wings, and quite intelligently concluded that he was a lonely castaway from some foreign ship wrecked by the storm. And yet, they called in a neighbor woman who knew everything about life and death to see him, and all she needed was one look to show them their mistake. "He's an angel," she told them. "He must have been coming for the child, but the poor fellow is so old that the rain knocked him down." On the following day, everyone knew that a flesh-and-blood angel was held captive in Pelayo's house. Against the judgment of the wise neighbor woman, for whom angels in those times were the fugitive survivors of a celestial conspiracy, they did not have the heart to club him to death. Pelayo watched over him all afternoon from the kitchen, armed with his bailiff's club, and before going to bed he dragged him out of the mud and locked him up with the hens in the wire chicken coop. In the middle of the night, when the rain stopped, Pelayo and Elisenda were still killing crabs. A short time afterward, the child woke up without a fever and with a desire to eat. Then they felt magnanimous and decided to put the angel on a raft with fresh water and provisions for 3 days and leave him to his fate on the high seas. But when they went out into the courtyard with the first light of dawn, they found the whole neighborhood in front of the chicken coop having fun with the angel, without the slightest reverence, tossing him things to eat through the openings in the wire as if he weren't a supernatural creature, but a circus animal. Father Gonzaga arrived before 7 o'clock, alarmed at the strange news. By that time, onlookers less frivolous than those at dawn had already arrived, and they were making all kinds of conjectures concerning the captive's future. The simplest among them thought that he should be named mayor of the world. Others of sterner mind felt that he should be promoted to the rank of 5-star general in order to win all wars. Some visionaries hoped that he could put to stud in order to implant the earth a race of winged wise men who could take charge of the universe. But Father Gonzaga, before becoming a priest, had been a robust woodcutter. Standing by the wire, he reviewed his catechism in an instant and asked them to open the door so that he could take a close look at the pitiful man who looked more like a huge decrepit hen among the fascinated chickens. He was lying in the corner, drying his open wings in the sunlight among the fruit peels and breakfast leftovers that the early risers had thrown him. Alien to the impertinences of the world, he only lifted his antiquarian eyes and murmured something in his dialect when Father Gonzaga went into the chicken coop and said good morning to him in Latin. The parish priest had his first suspicion of an impostor when he saw that he did not understand the language of God or know how to greet his ministers. Then he noticed that seen close up he was much too human. He had an unbearable smell of the outdoors. The backside of his wings was strewn with parasites, and his main feathers had been mistreated by terrestrial winds, and nothing about him measured up to the proud dignity of angels. Then he came out of the chicken coop and in a brief sermon warned the curious against the risks of being ingenuous. He reminded them that the devil had the bad habit of making use of carnival tricks in order to confuse the unwary. He argued that if wings were not the essential element in determining the difference between a hawk and an airplane, they were even less so in the recognition of angels. Nevertheless, he promised to write a letter to his bishop so that the latter would write to his primate, so that the latter would write to the supreme pontiff in order to get the final verdict from the highest courts. His prudence fell on sterile hearts. The news of the captive angel spread with such rapidity that after a few hours the courtyard had the bustle of a marketplace, and they had to call in troops with fixed bayonets to disperse the mob that was about to knock the house down. Oh, my. Hi, Pat. I'm glad to have you. Okay. Elisenda, her spine all twisted from sweeping up so much marketplace trash, then got the idea of fencing in the yard and charging 5 cents admission to see the angel. The curious came from far away. A traveling carnival arrived with a flying acrobat who buzzed over the crowd several times, but no one paid any attention to him because his wings were not those of an angel, but rather those of a sidereal bat. The most unfortunate invalids on earth came in search of health. a poor woman who since childhood had been counting her heartbeats and had run out of numbers, a Portuguese man who couldn't sleep because the noise of the stars disturbed him, a sleepwalker who got up at night to undo the things he had done while awake, and many others with less serious ailments. In the midst of that shipwreck, disorder that made the earth tremble, Pelayo and Elisenda were happy with fatigue. For in less than a week they had crammed their rooms with money, and the line of pilgrims waiting their turn to enter still reached beyond the horizon. The angel was the only one who took no part in his own act. He spent his time trying to get comfortable in his borrowed nest, befuddled by the hellish heat of the oil lamps and sacramental candles that had been placed along the wire. At first, they tried to make him eat some mothballs, which, according to the wisdom of the wise neighbor woman, were the food prescribed for angels. But he never turned them down, just as he turned down the papal lunches that the penitents brought him, and they never found out whether it was because he was an angel or because he was an old man that in the end ate nothing but eggplant mush. His only supernatural virtue seemed to be patience, especially during the first days, when the hens pecked at him, searching for the stellar parasites that proliferated in his wings, and the cripples pulled out feathers to touch their defective parts with, and even the most merciful threw stones at him, trying to get him to rise so they could see him standing. The only time they succeeded in arousing him was when they burned his side with an iron for branding steers, for he had been motionless for so many hours that they thought he was dead. He awoke with a start, ranting in his Hermetic language, and with tears in his eyes, and he flapped his wings a couple of times, which brought out a whirlwind of chicken dung and lunar dust, and a gale of panic that did not seem to be of this world. Although many thought that his reaction had not been one of rage, but of pain, from then on they were careful not to annoy him, because the majority understood that his passivity was not that of a hero taking his leave. But that of a cataclysm in response. Father Gonzaga held back the crowd's frivolity with formulas of maidservant inspiration, while awaiting the arrival of a final judgment on the nature of the captive. But the mail from Rome showed no sense of urgency. They spent their time finding out if the prisoner had a navel, if his dialect had any connection with Aramaic, how many times he could fit on the head of a pin, or whether he wasn't just a Norwegian with wings. Those meager letters might have come and gone until the end of time if a providential event had not put an end to the priest's tribulations. It so happened during those days, among so many other carnival attractions, there arrived in the town the traveling show of the woman who had been changed into a spider for having disobeyed her parents. The admission to see her was not only less than the admission to see the angel, but people were permitted to ask her all manner of questions about her absurd state, and to examine her up and down, so that no one would ever doubt the truth of her horror. She was a frightful tarantula the size of a ram, and with the head of a sad maiden. What was most heartrending, however, was not her outlandish shape, but the sincere affliction with which she recounted the details of her misfortune. While still practically a child, she had sneaked out of her parents' house to go to a dance. And while she was coming back through the woods, after having danced all night without permission, a fearful thunderclap rent the sky in two, and through the crack came the lightning bolt of brimstone that changed her into a spider. Her only nourishment came from the meatballs that charitable souls chose to toss into her mouth. A spectacle like that, full of so much human truth and with such a fearful lesson, was bound to defeat without even trying that of a haughty angel, who scarcely deigned to look at mortals. Besides, the few miracles attributed to the angel showed a certain mental disorder, like the blind man who didn't recover his sight but grew 3 new teeth, or the paralytic who didn't get to walk but almost won the lottery, and the leper whose sores sprouted sunflowers. Those consolation miracles, which were more like mocking fun, had already ruined the angel's reputation, when the woman, who had been changed into a spider, finally crushed him completely. That was how Father Gonzaga was forever cured of his insomnia, and Pelayo's courtyard went back to being as empty as during the time it had rained for 3 days and crabs walked through the bedrooms. The owners of the house had no reason to lament. With the money they saved, they built a 2-story mansion with balconies and gardens and high netting so that crabs wouldn't get in during the winter, and with iron bars on the windows so that angels wouldn't get in. Pelayo also set up a rabbit warren close to town and gave up his job as a bailiff for good. And Elisenda bought some satin pumps with high heels and many dresses of iridescent silk, the kind worn on Sunday by the most desirable women in those times. The chicken coop was the only thing that didn't receive any attention. If they washed it down with creolin and burned tears of myrrh inside it every so often, it was not in homage to the angel, but to drive away the dung heap stench that still clung everywhere like a ghost, and was turning the new house into an old one. At first, when the child learned to walk, they were careful that he not get too close to the chicken coop. But then they began to lose their fears and got used to the smell, and before the child got his second teeth, he'd gone inside the chicken coop to play, where the wires were falling apart. The angel was no less standoffish with him than with the other mortals, but he tolerated the most ingenious infamies with the patience of a dog who had no illusions. They both came down with chickenpox at the same time. The doctor who took care of the child couldn't resist the temptation to listen to the angel's heart, and he found so much whistling in the heart and so many sounds in his kidneys that it seemed impossible for him to be alive. What surprised him most, however, was the logic of his wings. They seemed so natural on that completely human organism that he couldn't understand why other men didn't have them too. When the child began school, it had been some time since the sun and rain had caused the collapse of the chicken coop. The angel went dragging himself about here and there like a stray dying man. They would drive him out of the bedroom with a broom, and a moment later find him in the kitchen. He seemed to be in so many places at the same time that they grew to think that he'd been duplicated, that he was reproducing himself all through the house, and the exasperated and unhinged Elisenda shouted that it was awful living in that hell full of angels. He could scarcely eat, and his antiquarian eyes had also become so foggy that he went about bumping into posts. All he had left were the bare cannulae of his last feathers. Pelayo threw a blanket over him and extended him the charity of letting him sleep in the shed, and only then did they notice that he had a temperature at night, and was delirious with the tongue twisters of an old Norwegian. That was one of the few times they became alarmed, for they thought he was going to die, and not even the wise neighbor woman had been able to tell them what to do with dead angels. And yet, he not only survived his worst winter, but seemed improved with the first sunny days. He remained motionless for several days in the farthest corner of the courtyard where no one would see him. And at the beginning of December, some large, stiff feathers began to grow on his wings. The feathers of a scarecrow, which looked more like another misfortune of decrepitude. But he must have known the reason for those changes, for he was quite careful that no one should notice them, that no one should hear the sea chanties that he sometimes sang under the stars. One morning, Elisenda was cutting some bunches of onions for lunch, when a wind that seemed to come from the high seas blew into the kitchen. Then she went to the window and caught the angel in his first attempts at flight. They were so clumsy that his fingernails opened a furrow in the vegetable patch, and he was on the point of knocking the shed down with the ungainly flapping that slipped on the light and couldn't get a grip in the air. But he did manage to gain altitude. Elisenda let out a sigh of relief for herself and for him when she watched him pass over the last houses, holding himself up in some way with the risky flapping of a senile vulture. She kept watching him even when she was through cutting the onions, and she kept on watching until it was no longer possible for her to see him, because then he was no longer an annoyance in her life, but an imaginary dot on the horizon of the sea. That was really good. Cheryl, thank you. Oh, you guys, I love it when you suggest things. Please, please, please send me suggestions. Either stories you know, stories you find, I don't know, just stories from your childhood, the things that your folks used to read to you, and we'll do it here. If I can find a copy, I may have a copy. I mean, obviously, there's lots of stuff. Lots of stuff. We've got it, or I will find it for you. Oh my gosh, you guys, that was so fun. That was such a good story. I was not at all sure what we were going to do there. So that was awesome. Scott is here. Hi, Scott. What did Sean say? Great read and nice background. Yes, I'm very fortunate to get to use the back room on Wednesdays when the weather is not nice enough to be outside. So, yeah, you guys, this is great. I'm sorry, there's some more. Oh, you're the sweetest. Oh, you guys. I can't tell you how much fun this is. So, I know we talked last week. There was maybe going to be a play coming up, but that is not happening yet. I got a message that is going to be delayed for a little bit until there is safe theater space to use and we can have audiences. Because obviously, if we are going to spend that much time rehearsing, we want you guys there with us. So it's fine. I have the script. I can still work on it. And at some point, we will have a date. Yeah, you know, we are rolling with the punches. So it is fine. Let's see. What was the title and author? Oh, okay, Pat. This was A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I will, let's see, can I? Ooh. Okay, I'm going to type and try to talk to you guys at the same time. So this could be fun. Very old man. Okay, so while I do this, you guys tell me what's happening with you. How is the new pergola holding up with these winds? I am sure there will be some very choice words if anything happens to it at this point. I know you guys put a ton of excuse me, a ton of work into that. And you got all your flowers out there now, which are just absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so let's see. Ahaha! Okay, so that worked. And now we're going to try to go back to, I don't know where we are and how to make this work so I can see what else you guys are saying. Can I do this? I don't know. Okay, so I will read your guys' comments afterwards. It is only 7:22. That was a quick one. Sorry, that is what happens when we cold read. We end up with lots of time, which is great. So, yeah. I don't know how to see what in the world is happening here. So we are just going to, I don't know, pretend like I know what I'm doing. It's kind of how we do these days. So, yeah, let me hold on, momento. So this is going to be weird because you guys can see me and I cannot see you. Nope. Okay. We'll go there. And I know, again, you guys can see me and I cannot see you. There we go. Maybe. Yes. That one I love. I have loaned this one. I believe this is the one. Oh no, it's this one, Behind a Mask. You guys. So, I'm going to get another copy because the person I gave this to is awesome and I want him to have it. But Louisa May Alcott wrote horror stories. Well, thrillers is what they call them. But they're awesome. And I was hoping to get into those. And I don't know if I can get into that. So that might have to be something for next week. Unless you guys have something, please have something. And if anybody can like comment on Pat's comments, tell me how to get back to all the rest of the comments, I would really appreciate that because I do not know what I am doing. Surprise! I know. So I don't want to refresh or go back because I'm afraid I will lose you guys, like for real. For real. So what if I do that? Will it let me do anything else? I don't think so. So, yeah, let me see. Let's try. Oh, sweet. Okay, so let's do chapter 1. I have found it. So I am just going to do this. And this is, this one is called The Mysterious Key and What It Opened. So again, I cannot see you guys, but you can see me. So we're going to just keep our fingers crossed and ride this out together. So chapter 1. Tredlyn lands and Tredlyn gold. Heir nor heiress heir shall hold. Undisturbed till spite of rust, truth is found in Tredlyn dust. This is the 3rd time I found you poring over that old rhyme. What is the charm, Richard? Not its poetry, I fancy. And the young wife laid a slender hand on the yellow time-worn page where, in Old English text, appeared the lines she laughed at. Richard Tredlyn looked up with a smile and threw by the book, as if annoyed at being discovered reading it. Drawing his wife's hand through his own, he led her back to her couch, folded the soft shawls about her, and sitting in a low chair beside her, said in a cheerful tone, though his eyes betrayed some hidden care, "My love, that book is a history of our family for centuries, and that old prophecy has never yet been fulfilled, except the heir and heiress line. I am the last Tredlyn, and as the time draws near when my child shall be born, I naturally think of his future, and hope he will enjoy his heritage in peace." "God grant it," softly echoed Lady Tredlyn, adding with a look askance at the old book, "I read that history once, and fancied it must be a romance. Such dreadful things are recorded in it. Is it all true, Richard?" "Yes, dear. I wish it was not. Ours has been a wild and unhappy race till the last generation or two. The stormy nature came in with old Sir Ralph, the fierce Norman knight, who killed his only son in a fit of wrath by a blow with his steel gauntlet because the boy's strong will would not yield to his." "Yes, I remember. And his daughter Clotilda held the castle during a siege and married her cousin Count Hugo. 'Tis a warlike race, and I like it in spite of the mad deeds. Married her cousin. That has been the bane of our family in times past. Being too proud to mate elsewhere, we have kept ourselves till idiots and lunatics began to appear. My father was the first who broke the law among us, and I followed his example, choosing the freshest, sturdiest flower I could find to transplant into our exhausted soil. I do hope it will do you honor by blossoming bravely. I never forgot that you took me from a humble home and have made me the happiest wife in England. And I never forgot that you, a girl of 18, consented to leave your hills and come to cheer the long deserted house of an old man like me, returned her husband fondly. Nay, don't call yourself old, Richard. You are only 45, the boldest and handsomest man in Warwickshire. But lately you look worried. What is it? Tell me, and let me advise or comfort you. It is nothing, Alice, except my natural anxiety for you. Well, Kingston, what do you want? Treblin's tender tones grew sharp as he addressed the entering servant, and the smile on his lips vanished, leaving them dry and white as he glanced at the card he handed him. In an instant he stood staring at it, then asked, "Is the man here?" "In the library, sir." "I'll come." Flinging the card into the fire, he watched it turn to ashes before he spoke with averted eyes. "Only some annoying business, love. I shall soon be with you again. Lie and rest till I come." With a hasty caress he left her, but as he passed a mirror, his wife saw an expression of intense excitement in his face. She said nothing, and lay motionless for several minutes, evidently struggling with some strong impulse. "He is ill and anxious, but hides it from me. I have a right to know, and he'll forgive me when I prove that it does no harm." As she spoke to herself, she rose, glided noiselessly through the hall, entered a small closet built in the thickness of the wall, and, bending to the keyhole of a narrow door, listened with a half-smile on her lips at the trespass she was committing. A murmur of voices met her ear. Her husband spoke oftenest, and suddenly some word of his dashed the smile from her face as if with a blow. She started, shrank and shivered, bending lower with set teeth, white cheeks, and panic-stricken heart. Paler and paler grew her lips, wilder and wilder her eyes, fainter and fainter her breath, till with a long sigh, a vain effort to save herself, she sank prone upon the threshold of the door, as if struck down by death. "Mercy on us, my lady, are you ill?" cried Hester, the maid, as her mistress glided into the room looking like a ghost, half an hour later. "I am faint and cold. Help me to my bed, but do not disturb Sir Richard." A shiver crept over her as she spoke, and casting a wild, woeful look about her, she laid her head upon the pillow like one who never cared to lift it up again. Hester, a sharp-eyed, middle-aged woman, watched the pale creature for a moment, then left the room muttering, "Something is wrong, and Sir Richard must know it. That black-bearded man came for no good, I'll warrant." At the door of the library she paused. No sound of voices came from within. A stifled groan was all she heard, and without waiting to knock she went in, fearing she knew not what. Sir Richard sat at his writing table, pen in hand, but his face was hidden on his arm, and his whole attitude betrayed the presence of some overwhelming despair. "Please, sir, my lady is ill. Shall I send for anyone?" No answer. Hester repeated her words, but Sir Richard never stirred. Much alarmed, the woman raised his head, saw that he was unconscious, and rang for help. But Richard Trevelyan was past help, though he lingered for some hours. He spoke but once, murmuring faintly, "Will Alice come to say goodbye?" "Bring her if she can," said the physician. Hester went, found her mistress lying as she left her, like a figure carved in stone. When she gave the message, Lady Trevelyan answered sternly, "Tell him I will not come," and turned her face to the wall, with an expression which daunted the woman too much for another word. Hester whispered the hard answer to the physician, fearing to utter it aloud, but Sir Richard heard it, and died with a despairing prayer for pardon on his lips. When day dawned, Sir Richard lay in his shroud, and his little daughter in her cradle, the one unwept, the other unwelcomed by the wife and mother, who 12 hours before had called herself the happiest woman in England. They thought her dying, and at her own command gave her the sealed letter bearing her address which her husband left behind him. She read it, laid it on her bosom, and waking from the trance which seemed to have strongly chilled and changed her, besought those about her with passionate earnestness to save her life. For 2 days she hovered on the brink of the grave, and nothing but the indomitable will to live saved her, the doctor said. On the 3rd day she rallied wonderfully, but some purpose seemed to gift her with unnatural strength. Evening came, and the house was very still, for all the sad bustle of preparation for Sir Richard's funeral was over, and he lay for the last night under his own roof. Hester sat in the darkened chamber of her mistress, and no sound broke the hush but the low lullaby the nurse was singing to the fatherless baby in the adjoining room. Lady Trevlyn seemed to sleep, but suddenly put back the curtain, saying abruptly, "Where does he lie?" "In the state chamber, my lady," replied Hester, anxiously watching the feverish glitter of her mistress's eye, the flush on her cheek, and the unnatural calmness of her manner. "Help me to go there. I must see him." "It would be your death, my lady. I beseech you, don't think of it," began the woman. But Lady Trevlyn seemed not to hear her, and something in her stern pallor awed the woman into submission. Wrapping the slight form of her mistress in a warm cloak, Hester half led, half carried her to the stateroom and left her on the threshold. "I must go it alone. Fear nothing, but wait for me here," she said, and closed the door behind her. 5 minutes had not elapsed when she reappeared with no sign of grief on her rigid face. "Take me to my bed and bring me my jewel box," she said, with a shuddering sigh, as the faithful servant received her with an exclamation of thankfulness. When her orders had been obeyed, she drew from her bosom the portrait of Sir Richard which she always wore, and removing the ivory oval from the gold case, she locked the former in a tiny drawer of the casket, replaced the empty locket in her breast, and bade Hester to give the jewels to Watson, her lawyer, who would see them put in a safe place till the child was grown. "Dear heart, my lady, you'll wear them yet, for you're too young to grieve all your days, even for so good a man as my blessed master. Take comfort and cheer up, for the dear child's sake, if no more." "I shall never wear them again," was all the answer as Lady Trevlyn drew the curtains, as if to shut out hope. Sir Richard was buried, and, the 9 days' gossip over, the mystery of his death died for want of food, for the only person who could have explained it was in such a state that it forbade all allusion to that tragic day. For a year Lady Trevlyn's reason was in danger. A long fever left her so weak in mind and body that there was little hope of recovery, and her days were passed in a state of apathy sad to witness. She seemed to have forgotten everything, even the shock which had so sorely stricken her. The sight of her child failed to rouse her, and month after month slipped by, leaving no trace of their passage on her mind, and but slightly renovating her feeble body. Who the stranger was, what his aim in coming, or why he never reappeared, no one discovered. The contents of the letter left by Sir Richard were unknown, for the paper had been destroyed by Lady Trevlyn, and no clue could be got from her. Sir Richard had died of heart disease, the physician said, though he might have lived years had no sudden shock assailed him. There were few relatives to make investigations, and friends soon forgot the sad young widow. So the years rolled on, and Lillian, the heiress, grew from infancy to childhood in the shadow of this mystery. Oh, yay. Okay, so, yeah, that, I forgot how much I like that. So we are going to, you guys want to do chapter 2? Actually, I think we will, the clouds are getting ready to open up, which means rain will be pouring in this door and on the laptop. So we are going to wrap it up for tonight. You guys, thank you so much for being here. I love you. I will see you guys on Saturday. Oh my goodness. I'm a disheveled mess. Whew. Anyway, I will see you on Saturday for Edgar Allan Poe. I will get that put together right now while this is uploaded to Insta. And you guys put your Poe requests in. Yeah, because we have gotten through my favorites. So maybe some obscure ones that you guys like. Jason, I know you probably have a long list. So we may do, I'll have to look and see how long it is. I know Terrell suggested Never Bet the Devil Your Head, and we have not done that one yet. So I'll have to look and see, because if that's going to be a 2-hour one, we may break it up. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it'll be a surprise. So I will talk to you guys soon. I will see you on Saturday. Thank you again so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you soon. Bye.